Hey folks, what's up? This is Evan from Stock Music Musician, and today I've got a video for you on the 7 types of reverb. In this video we're going to cover all the types of different reverbs out there, and I want to give you a few examples of what they sound like, and also kind of talk about the main controls and maybe some tips on how to use each of them. Before we go farther though, you don't need to take notes on this video because I've got a free cheat sheet that you can download by clicking the link below. You can sign up for this cheat sheet and it'll have all this information contained on it, and it'll be there as your handy reference next time you try and do sound design or mix. So let's take a quick listen to this song and we will go through then all the different types of reverb. Currently there's no reverb on this Rhodes piano, and we're going to try all 7 types of reverb and we'll kind of hear how it changes things. So let's take a quick listen. This is just a simple loop. So here we go. So there we have it. Now let's watch the intro. Okay, so what I really want to focus on this track is just the Rhodes piano. We'll put it in solo mode and we'll walk through the different types of reverb one at a time. I'll tell you a little about each type of reverb and I'll tell you a little bit about their best uses. So as an overview, we've got 7 types of reverb. Arguably, there's not quite this many, but I think it's always better to over-categorize than under-categorize. I think it just makes it easier conceptually. So the first type of reverb is a room reverb. Then you've got a plate reverb. You've got a spring reverb, a chamber reverb, a hall reverb, a atmospheric reverb, and a nonlinear reverb. And then at the end, we've got a reverb that kind of can do everything. My general thought is that you're usually better off going with specialized reverbs that are like just designed to do one thing, as opposed to a jack of all trades reverb. There's a lot of good plugins out there. There's also a lot of very bad reverb plugins. Reverb is a little more complicated than most other types of processing, and so it can really help to invest in your reverb plugins. Well, Holla makes great stuff. UAD makes good stuff. So let's start with the room reverb. What a room reverb does is it literally just replicates the sound of the reverb in a room. We've all been in rooms where either, let's say you've been out to a restaurant and it's just like super echoey and you can't hear anything, or you've been in like maybe a recording studio and there's almost no echoes. That is basically what a room reverb is going to do, is everything in between those sounds. And you're going to probably want a room reverb on every single song you mix, and you're going to want to probably send almost every instrument to the same room reverb. Why? Because this is going to make it sound like every instrument was recorded in the same room. It's the way a real recording studio would work. If you had a band in a recording studio with, microphones on all of their amplifiers, they would all those microphones would be picking up the sound of the same room because they were really all in the same room. So think about it this way. A room reverb is recreating a real space, and you probably want a splash of it on every track. So let's listen to this Rhodes piano real quick without any reverb, just so we can hear what it's going to be doing. All right, now we'll turn on the room reverb with just all the way wet. And then we'll blend it in and talk about a few of the controls. But this is a medium room, all the way wet. So if you're going for, you can hear already there's a lot of different varieties in what rooms can sound like. You've been in a ton of different rooms and just maybe haven't noticed the different quality of sounds. Brighter, bigger, smaller. But something like a medium room is probably where most of us, is probably something you can use on almost every mix. So let's just blend it down so that it's just a touch of room reverb, as if, I was playing a Rhodes piano in a room with a mic going into a guitar cabinet and there's a mic on it. And we'll hear how nice this sounds. Nothing massive, but it just creates a little more space, a little more sense, fills things up sonically more. And if you have multiple instruments going into it, then you really are going to get more of a vibe. Let's also just listen with a large room. And the longer decay, that was way too long. But basically, room reverb should be imperceptible to the ear. It should just sort of feel like something built into the track. And you're just doing it to enhance the glue, the cohesiveness, create a sense of space and place. And also, it is something you need to be careful that it doesn't overtake the track, because you're going to have it on so many instruments that it needs to be a pretty short tail. Otherwise, it's just going to overwhelm. Now, the next reverb I want to look at is a plate reverb. And unlike a room reverb, which is totally emulating something natural, a plate reverb is something totally mechanical and fake. And I believe it was actually the first type of artificial reverb created as an effect. So it kind of worked like a guitar amp, where sound was sent into a metal plate, which would vibrate, and then a pickup, like a guitar pickup, but different, would translate those vibrations into reverb. And this is a beautiful sound. It is used all over the place. It can genuinely be used on just about any instrument, but specifically I think it's most known for being used on vocals, snare, would be the first two things. This would be the first reverb I would reach for vocals and snare. It can be good on guitar, synths. It can be good on just about anything. But you'll notice this has more of a character to it, and it's the sort of reverb where it's definitely not a natural sound, but it usually sounds really good in the mix. So we'll listen all the way wet, and then at a reasonable level, and kind of experiment a little bit with the settings. So you feel how this just adds a little more interest, a little more sparkle, a little more tail, more density. It's just doing beautiful things to the sound without totally changing it or getting in the way. We'll turn up a little bit more, and then this reverb in particular has it emulates a classic EMT 140 reverb, and there's 3 different versions, so we'll experiment with a little bit of each of those and just the different time length of the delay or the decay. you can just hear how lovely that is. And often you can stack reverbs. I won't be doing a lot of that on this because I'm mostly using these as inserts. And generally I recommend more with a lot of these reverbs using them as sends so that you can send multiple instruments to the same reverbs. It's just way more efficient, but also more natural. But then you can also send reverbs to reverbs. So often you could consider sending your plate reverb to like your room reverb. Or you just have you have them in parallel, not to be too complicated, but you both have the room reverb and the plate reverb on an instrument. Instead, we'll hear this in series, where at first it goes to the room, then it goes to the plate. I think you'll really enjoy what this sounds like. So let's listen real quick. It almost has it blooms kind of. And let's just listen to this in the context of the mix. I think it'll sound nice, and then we'll continue on with the other reverbs. But the point is, none of these are really, the ones that we're using so far are not transformative. They are just enhancing the sound, and you'll want to make sure that they also enhance the groove. So you want to listen from time to time as you start stacking reverbs that you don't lose the rhythm of the track, that these reverb tails don't start covering up other parts of the music. So let's listen. And that was sounding better than originally. You definitely need to dial it in, but you heard already how at first, even though it sounded really good in isolation, the density of the piano just started to become too much, and you kind of lost where the rhythm was. So you constantly need to be listening. And there's a bunch of tricks and tips you can do to help it groove. We're not going to cover that in this video. This is just, I want to focus on the different types of reverb. But by the way, if you're enjoying this video, please turn that like button up to 11. Subscribe, stay tuned, because you're always going to get the best music tips out there for producing great sounding music, learning all about music production, learning about Reason, and learning how to license your music if that's what you'd like to do to make a little bit of money from this passion of yours. Okay, let's move on to the next type of reverb, and we'll turn these two off. This is a spring reverb. It is a very characterful sound. It's most commonly associated, I think, with surf rock, Dick Dale. This is basically a lot of guitars, you'll notice, have a built-in reverb, or guitar amps. Yeah, guitars with reverbs. No, guitar amps with built-in reverb. It's almost always a spring reverb, unless it's some sort of fancy new digital amp, but all the classics are spring reverb. Sometimes it can be very extreme. Sometimes it's much more subtle. This is not the sort of thing that you want to put on everything, but on guitar, on pads, it can sometimes sound good. On organ, it sounds great. You just have to experiment. This particular spring reverb I'm working with here by UAD is a really nice one. It does not have as much of the spring of a spring reverb. It is a little smoother. We'll listen to it a bit and see what it does. And the one thing I also want to point out about spring reverb is that it's probably the least essential of these that I'm talking about here to have in your arsenal. But if you ever feel like a track just needs something, often a spring reverb can just be that thing. It's just a weird tool, and you should experiment with it a lot, but also don't feel that you need to run out and get a spring reverb, because it's a characterful thing as opposed to a necessary part of mixing. So let's listen. Whereas just to back up, I think a good plate and a good room reverb are essential. You're going to have those on every single song. All right, let's listen. you hear how it's like there's, especially on when there's a lot of attack. I'm going to turn up the attack on the synth or on the Rhodes, and you'll hear, I think, a little bit more of the spikiness of it. So let's just go to agitated, and now maybe you'll hear a little bit more. Let's just turn it off real quick. There's sort of the traditional. And soloed. So with the Spring, you can, I mean, it's doing really nice things to the Rhodes. It's just, is this always necessary? Not always necessary tone shaping, but a lot of character, very much a vintage vibe. So if that's what you go for a lot in your music, then this can be really nice to have, especially on things like synths, guitars, and organs and stuff. Next up, we have a chamber, which is like basically before fancy computer algorithms was how most artificial reverb was done in a recording studio if they weren't using a plate or a spring or just the general room. So the way a chamber worked was like literally under the recording studio or on the roof or in a stairwell. There would just be a big echoey room. You can see a picture of it here, really. This is the one at Capitol Studios, like a concrete room. They'd take speakers with the mix or whatever they wanted to send, you know, if it was the vocals or whatever, point them at the walls and then put microphones in the room to pick up the reverberations. So this is kind of like a room reverb on steroids. It's not a room that would sound good in and of itself, but when blended in, all this energy can really add color and character. So we'll listen to this all the way wet, all the way dry, and then we'll mix around with it again. But a chamber, you don't need it for every track, but where it works really good. It can be nice on strings because it's not quite as full as a hall, which we'll get to. It can be nice on vocals used subtly. Sometimes it can make drums slap. Sometimes it can also, I mean, most of these reverbs can absolutely ruin everything. But when used right, it can be nice on most things, but you just have to use it right. And probably you almost always need to use a filter, a high-pass filter to roll off some of that low-end mud. So we'll listen to it soloed wet and then play around. And it really just creates a nice sense of place. Like, it's more characterful than the rooms, but it's not overwhelming like you'll hear with the hall, which can really be useful. I think especially where it's useful, unlike in the room where you can with a room reverb where you put it on everything and it kind of just makes everything feel like it's in the same room. A chamber can be really good on a lead where it's up front and center, but then it creates this like bigger space, almost like a spotlight when used properly. But when used improperly, it'll just, everything will fall apart again. So now we're going to hear a hall reverb. And this kind of models, like if you go to the opera or, see a play in a giant room, that's the hall sound. So let's, again, listen to this, with a few different settings, but we'll start all the way wet. There's going to tend to be longer decay times as well. Halls are great on pads, on strings. They can, they can find their way onto most mixes. You have to be really careful. It's definitely not like the first reverb you reach for, but it can really be helpful in sort of creating like tone and texture. And, especially if you're doing like very vibey stuff, a hall reverb can be really useful. So let's give it a listen. Do you hear how long that tail is? It's long. So there's, everything from a concert hall. I mean, there's a lot of different choices, but really if you're using a hall, you should probably be using a hall. We'll try a few of the other halls just to give you a sense of it. Do you hear how it's also like it sounds like things are sustaining more? It creates a whole other sense to the track than was originally there. And I mean, it's actually working much better on this track than I had envisioned. It does not work on everything. This is one of those ones that can ruin a mix. They can all ruin a mix, like I say, but halls should absolutely be something you experiment with, but just be careful. Let's listen to this one in the context of the full mix again and see if it's actually helping or if it's bearing everything. And I think it does not work at all in the mix, as lovely as it sounded by itself. But instead what I'm going to do for your pleasure is take this vintage verb and instead bring it down onto the strings, and we'll see what happens there, because strings are usually where it'll sound good. So now let's listen. That sounds much better now. Much better on the strings, and we can dial. So you have to just be open to different things. So we'll go back to concert hall, a little more of a mix. I don't think we want pre-delay because that'll actually make it just sound closer and take away some of that attack. Let's listen now. So there you have it. It can be really powerful. I mean, it just smooths out those strings and makes them sit much better, be much less sharp. The next reverb I want to show you, this is sort of more of an application. This is what I would call ambience reverb, where it just adds a little so much to the track. It should be blended in so subtly that you don't even hear it, but this can really be helpful just to create a little depth on something you need to feature or push something back a little bit. I found this has worked really good on piano, vocals, simple, like synth parts. It just adds a little bit of air. That's not really a good word for it, but a little something to a mix that just lets it stand out in a way by kind of creating its own space around it. And this is kind of, it's random. It's usually a random haul with a pretty like big setting, but then just blended into taste. So let's listen to this. We'll listen all wet and then dial it back in. Of course, it's not on. Let's turn it on. All the way wet. You'll notice how with this one, it doesn't at all sound like the real sound, the original sound, unlike the other ones where it's just like more washed out or whatever. This is using a lot of modulation as well and just doing weird things, but in the context of the mix, it can really help. So we'll just add a little touch. It just creates sort of a little extra element there. So let's listen in the context of the mix and see if it's helping or not. So in my view, this ambient reverb is really adding something here because it's not getting in the way of the initial sound or the rhythm. It's like this whole other texture that like makes you pay attention a little bit more to the piano, but without really doing it in a distracting way. It just creates a little more information, something a little bit more of interest. And so kind of similar to this, the last one we have is a non-linear reverb or random reverb. And basically these kind of like swell at the end, I guess is how I would describe it. Like you have your reverb and it just kind of gets bigger the less sound is into it. And these are more for tonal shaping or for like special effects or just really weird ambiances. They are incredibly useful, but they are not straightforward for like most tracks. This is much more of a creative reverb application. So let's listen wet and mixed in. So you hear how it's almost like, there's echoes, like it elongates the back end of the track, which in sparse arrangements can be really nice. But in busy stuff, it's going to overwhelm it quickly. For lo-fi stuff, this is more really, I think, genre and song specific than instrument specific. sparse tracks, ambient tracks, breakdowns, special effects, nonlinear can be really a cool approach. You can try it on other stuff. Sometimes it can sound interesting on a snare or like on a single hit, but as like your go-to reverb on everything, it can often be too much. Let's listen on and off again. And unlike the kind of what I would describe as like the ambient reverb, like which was creating something different, this is kind of just creating the same thing, but messing with the volume of it a bit and sort of its placement. So let's listen in the context of the mix. I would be surprised if it works. It actually worked better than I would have suspected. And now, just as a bonus, I'm just going to turn on all of the reverbs and we'll totally mess this up. Like I said, I recommend usually most of these would be on send channels. A few, if I was trying to use a creative effect, might be on the main channel itself, but by and large, my room and my plate and my chamber and my hall would be on send effects. Again, don't forget to click and download that cheat sheet. It's literally got like a paragraph summary of each of these different types of reverbs and how best to use them, so you don't need to take notes. You can always remember this, so click that link. Let's just listen to how awful this is going to sound with all of the reverbs on. We'll turn them on one at a time so we can just kind of reassess what they all do. And the hall one's down on the strings. I'm just not going to bring it back. So, room reverb emulates a real room. We'll do them one at a time first, and then we'll bring them all in. Plate. A little bit of, like, warmth, echoey almost, but very dense. Spring reverb. Very characterful, not always useful, but good for creative effects. Chamber, like a very bright resonant room, can be really good on your featured instrument. Fairly long tail, but not the longest. We would have had a hall reverb, which is basically like a concert hall, very long, great for background stuff, will ruin the rhythm of your tracks, but can be great on synths, pads, strings, anything you need to throw back. Backing vocals can sometimes benefit. Ambient reverb can just add a little touch of something. And finally, nonlinear reverb, which is going to be sort of your swelling at the end. there you have it. A lot of different applications of reverb, and I hope this really helps you start using reverb a little more strategically in your productions, so you stop washing everything out and you can really be focused on making great sounding music that reflects your talents.